Gentlemen, thank you for being part of Pennsylvania Literary Festival's inaugural event. At this time, I have the pleasure of introducing Randall Silvis, your next reader. Randall Silvis is the author of 13 critically acclaimed books thus far, one collection of short fiction, 9 novels, and 1 book of narrative nonfiction. Among his works are The Boy Who Shoots Crows, Flying Fish, and The Boy Who Learned That the Moon is Cold. You can find him at randallsilvis.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Randall Silvis.
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to change things up a little today, and because I only have 5 minutes to read, and I can barely say hello in 5 minutes. So I'm going to just read the openings from three different novels. This is in a town called Mundo Muerto. It's a magic realism novel. In a town called Mundo Muerto, there lives a woman who bore a dolphin's child. She's an old woman now, La Vieja, and most of the villagers dare glance at her only when she is looking the other way. But this is never difficult, for she is always looking the other way, out to sea, where she watches her silvery fins to flash across the horizon like distant signal flags. Whether standing on the cliff's edge or on the rocky shore below, La Vieja waits there for one of the flags to turn ashore, for a handsome man dressed all in white to climb toward her over the patient rocks, his clothes miraculously dry by the time he reaches her, his fingertips kissing hers. Will you dance with me, Lucia Luna? A tall and graceful man with hips that move like water, his smile thin but sweet, his arm hooked around her back now, fingers caressing quivers into her spine, his left hand always atop his pork pie hat. These days it is hard to believe that Lucia Luna was once a beauty. Her skin is darkly layered with years now, wrinkled with bitterness. Her hair is a tattered thundercloud that often wraps itself around the crag of her face. But there was a time, the grandfather said, when no man in town could keep his heart from dreaming of her. So Lucia Luna goes from the town's beauty to an old hag because of a single dance with a man who might or might not have been a dolphin man. This is Disquiet Heart. It's the second of my 2 novels that I did for St. Martin's featuring Edgar Allan Poe as a detective. And this one is set in 1847 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There is an actual doctor who figures into this story. His name was Alfred Brune Richter, who lived in Pittsburgh around the turn of the century. He was responsible for a series of heinous crimes, and I've taken him and transplanted him to 1847. 27 February 1847. My dear Mr. Poe, I write to you as no mere admirer of your work, but as one who has discerned in your essays and criticisms a singular honesty of intellect, and in your tales a willingness to plumb the very depths, however rank, of human nature, and in your poetry a rare and penetrating acumen, conjoined with an altogether unearthly music. I write to you, sir, as your devoted disciple. As such, it is my hope and desire that you will consider an invitation to visit me here in Pittsburgh, and thence to remain as a guest in my house for as long as you might choose to do so. As incentive, I offer you a speaking engagement before an enthusiastic audience to be presented by the Quintillion Society, on whose board I am privileged to serve as the president. As remuneration, we will gladly provide your usual stipend and a more than usual attention to your every word. You may address us on the subject of your choice. We have in the past hosted to great success other writers whose names you will recognize, as for example Messrs. Dickens and Longfellow and Bulwer Lytton, all of whom we lavished upon but a modicum of the enthusiasm with which you will be greeted. Moreover, while a guest in my home, you will want for nothing. I am a man of ample means, all of which I shall endeavor to employ in the furtherance of your comfort. You will not want for edifying company, sir, of either gender, for your admirers here are many. However, if solitude is what you crave, that too shall be yours. I pray you will not consider it indelicate if I extend to you my condolences on the loss of your young wife in the early days of this year. I do so only to ensure you that I am well aware of a man's special needs in the wake of such misfortune, and to make it known to you that each and every one of those needs will be provided for here in Pittsburgh. In closing, Mr. Poe, allow me to confess that though we have yet to meet vis-a-vis, I consider you my brother in spirit. Many among my acquaintances have remarked upon the striking similarity of countenance we share, while others have gone so far as to suspect your writings as my own, composed under the nom de plume of E.A. Poe. In my estimation, these conjectures scarcely scratch the surface of the bond we share, for it is my belief, sir, that you and I are reflections of the same spirit. We are closer than brothers, more alike than twins. We are the same man in two bodies. We drink the same air of devastation. You will not, I pray, be put off by this assumption of familiarity. Only know that the kinship I feel for you, derived through the study of and esteem of your work, is both real and profound. In my own line of work, I have occasion to witness numerous variations of unnatural behavior. These too we might discuss and analyze during our time together, should you agree to accept my humble invitation. Such discussions will be to my edification, I am sure, though perhaps it is not overly presumptive to suggest that one or two of my scientific investigations into the grayer realms of the disquiet heart might provide inspiration to your own endeavors. For I suspect that our labors, like our temperaments, are of a kind, sir, though conducted by different means. You employ the pen, whereas I employ the scalpel. But we are nonetheless embarked upon the same journey, you and I. We can perhaps provide for one another not only pleasant company, but some assistance along the way. I await your response and the consummation of a brotherhood. Yours most sincerely, Alfred K. Brun Richter, M.D. Poe goes ahead and accepts that invitation, and dire consequences follow. This last opening I'm going to read to you is from a novel called Mysticus. It spans a time of 1949 through 2018 with 5 multiple narrators alternating between their time periods. And I'm just going to read to you the first paragraph. At 9 years of age, Ronald Shepard held in his hands a blue jar, and in the jar was a fetus. Beneath the dusty glow of the bare fruit cellar bulb, Ronald mistook the fetus for a tadpole, a pollywog, and had his mother not restrained him, he would have run for his fishing rod to skewer the newt on a number 6 hook. But Rosemary Shepard explained to her son that this was not bait for a hungry sea bass. This was a fetus, his brother. She had saved it for him in a blue ball mason jar filled with alcohol. Ronald named the fetus Ricardo. So this is a story of Ronald from the gift of his a fetus of his brother, whom he develops a telepathic connection with up to the end of the novel in 2018. So that's it. I guess I'm supposed to pull one of these questions out of the basket and see if I can respond to it. Is that right?
Yes.
I can't read them first?
You can do whatever you want.
If you had $1 million, what would you spend it on? Well, I play the lottery, and I've always felt that if I win the lottery, I will retire from everything except writing, and I'll move to someplace temperate and sunny that has no snow, has lots of fruits and vegetables, and I'll live in a little cabin there where I can watch the clouds and the mountains. And the rest of the money, I would start an endowment called the June Light Foundation in honor of my mother. Her name was June, and who was the most generous and self-sacrificing person I ever met. So that's what I do with $1 million.
Very nice. And never forget to tell the people where they can find your books.
Oh, you can find my books at Amazon.com. Of course, all the online booksellers, any of the major booksellers. Books don't stay in stock very long at the major booksellers, but every one of those places, Barnes & Noble and all the others, can order them for you. Thanks very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have the pleasure of announcing our next reader tonight, Brent, a contributing editor for the Tusculum Review and an editor for the Gulf Stream, Poems of the Gulf Coast, Snake Nation Press, 2013. He's a native of Nice, Mississippi, where he raised cattle and watermelons on his family's farm. Slash Pine Press published his first collection, The Sawyer Prophecies. Let's hear it for Mr. Brent House.
Thank you. Yes, most of these poems that you'll hear today are based in Nice, Mississippi, and there's actually not a lot there. So most of them are about like walking through the woods and seeing trees and, oh look, there's a cow. Such things happen in Nice, Mississippi. My first poem is titled Auger of Deep Wells, and my family has a long history with wells. We were the first settlers in Nice, and so all the wells were dug by members of our family, and my parents were terribly afraid that I would fall in the well. And so they always warned me when I was walking in the woods, don't fall in the well. You gotta be careful. Look for those places where there are no pine trees. There's probably a well there. And there's good reason for my family to fear that, because we have a history of people falling in wells in my family, of course. But actually it wasn't accidental. It was my great-grandfather who was a veteran of the war, which is what we call the war, down below the Mason-Dixon line. So after the war, he came home and he had a sharecropper who was working for him on his farm, who had a beautiful young wife, and my great-grandfather fell in love with this beautiful young woman and invited his sharecropper to talk to him about the plans for the next year. And he sat with that sharecropper near the well, put his arm around that sharecropper, and then moved his arm backwards and covered the well. And so my family was always afraid that fate would pay us back for that little accident on purpose. This poem is called Auger of Deep Wells. On a land not mine, I am a tent to proceed and search for sustenance where once my family axed the clearing to till, dug down to their water. I am baptized, and I know where the depth lies, for the knowledge has been passed. Through hallowed discourse, I walk with confidence. Even in this breathic forest of second stand timber, I believe to be my fellowship, where I may take my stand and be swallowed in canopy. Aunt Flannery used to say, we all bound to a particular society and a particular history, to a particular sound and a particular idiom. Sometimes when I am out on this land, I can hollow myself to who I am bound to, through sense, through blood, and I know my blood past has taken an enemy to the water with indefeasible thirst. Under the waterline dwells redemption. In the evidence of two unyielding flows, divinity gives a hardening to the flesh. Barren thorns in the land, deep roots in the well. And so many of my deep roots come from that well, from that great-grandmother who I inherited somewhat unfortunately, but I'm grateful to her. And I always claim that she added all the beauty to my family, to our family line. Let me see. My great-grandfather was not a nice man, but I grew up a little bit nicer. And so when I was out shooting my BB gun at mockingbirds as a little bitty boy. I never expected to actually hit one, and then eventually the BB kind of arched its way in a gentle curve and actually hit the bird I was aiming at, and it fell. And so I had to bury that bird. And this is the poem about the experience of burying that bird and how very, very sad I was that I had to do that. It's titled Augur of Flailing. The manic threnody of the mockingbird mourned from a plum branch, a cruel hope passing, a cruel boy pointing at exposures of white breast, and resounding strange fruit, his copper seeds arching imperfect through the air, eyes following a slow progression. Lord, I lament, quail with remorse of intransigent sin, and touched light still flailing by reverbs. Damp is the hole from which I plucked the bead. The chamber ruddles with sharp shot return. A body held quivers with tearing blood. Lord, you mistake me much, for I lament this medley so dulled by asperity, and carry such parabolic loss in scaffold palms as meager penance for an arbitrary disgrace, enclose true resonance in the rooted soil, welling clods into wrenching veins. And so the strange fruit is a reference to a great, great song that reminds us that I was not the first Southerner to do bad things underneath big, tall trees. And that strange fruit of the South has been present for many, many years. Let me see. I will try one more poem. Augur of Illuminated Manuscript. And of course, illuminated manuscripts are these beautifully crafted books with these great big letters. And when my father would build fences on our farms, he crafted them so carefully, and he wanted them to be a beautiful thing that would last forever. And I thought about the process of stitching books together and how that fence was his way of stitching our land together, claiming our home, and claiming the story that he would provide for me in my childhood. So this is Augur of Illuminated Manuscript, and it's about his arms. Puncture turned to tear. The pull of my father's arm on the ream of wire, steel unstrands across a line. A field with the smoothness of vellum. We frail into the hard red clay, staple into blackened post, the leather of glove worn in the curl of grip, taut and tie wire to corner. Fabric of his shirt dries on a nail embedded, runs threads through the sloping manuscripts of hills. This will be here long after I'm gone. And that was his promise to me, and it's true.
Your poems?
Yes.
Alrighty. I'll give you a crack at that. And read it.
Oh my goodness, my question is, what is your greatest fear? I mean, clearly my greatest fear is to fall into a well. So that's not a problem. Easy enough answer. My poems can be found on Amazon used copies because my book is handcrafted, and there was only 125 of these made by hand. But you can find used copies on Amazon. You can also find my collection, a new collection of poems about the Gulf Coast that I edited, Gulf Stream Poems of the Gulf Coast. That's available at snakenationpress.net.